Ukraine, the US, and Russia have agreed to a new meeting.
We are ready for any working formats that can truly bring peace closer and make it lasting.
New conditions from the Kremlin. Putin demands international recognition of Donbas as Russian territory.
These are all the results of our work.
On the home stretch, Trump once again made a statement about the war in Ukraine.
We are working hard to end this war. We are incredibly close to this, and we have almost reached our goal.
Russians without Starlink? Lavrov threatens Musk with rockets and war.
What will happen if we strike the factories producing Starlink right now? To hell with them.
And the crazy propagandist is also threatening the people of Kharkiv.
And for Belgorod not to be touched, Kharkiv must not exist. Therefore, residents of Kharkiv, leave the cursed city.
A free fire show is blazing brightly and beautifully at a Russian gas station. Look how the roof's on fire! Nastya!
Come on, let's go!
Friends, we'll talk about this and more on the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. This is the topic of the day. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to give us a like. Blind as kittens, the armed forces of Ukraine claim that after Russians were disconnected from Starlink by decision of Elon Musk, the Russian offensive has significantly slowed down following this blockade. The most interesting and vivid example so far happened in the Zaporizhzhia direction. There, blinded by the lack of communication, the Russians started firing at each other. Today, we'll also talk about the brilliant operation of the Ukrainian armed forces in Kupyansk. Near Kupyansk, the Russians found themselves surrounded. All the details are coming up in the report. Afterwards, we'll have an exclusive conversation with military expert Roman Tsvetan.
The European Union has agreed on a €90 billion loan to support Ukraine's general budget and its defense needs.
Today, we approved the decision to provide Ukraine with €90 billion for the next 2 years. As a matter of urgency, we will provide a loan secured by the European Union's budget. This will make it possible to meet Ukraine's urgent financial needs, and they will only repay this loan after Russia pays reparations.
All of this, of course, is nothing but blatant plans for a foreign military intervention. That's what it should be called. For us, this is absolutely unacceptable. Russia will seek to resolve this issue by military or political means.
The battle for Kupyansk has, without exaggeration, become the most successful operation by Ukrainian forces in the past year. The clearing of the city is ongoing, with up to 50 occupiers surrounded.
In Kupyansk itself, the enclave remains. Its boundaries are clearly defined and it is completely encircled by our troops. And the systematic clearing of the Russian occupiers in this part of the city continues. The rest of Kupyansk is under our complete control. There is no sound of shelling there. The situation in the city is calm and under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
And all this is happening against the backdrop of Putin and his generals repeatedly declaring the so-called heroic liberation of Kupyansk.
Units of the Zapad group have liberated the city of Kupyansk and continue to destroy the formations of the armed forces of Ukraine encircled on the left bank of the Oskil River.
In the Kupyansk direction, assault units of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division of the 6th Army have completed the liberation of the city of Kupyansk.
So, that's it? It's completely finished?
That's correct. The city is under our control, and isolated small scattered enemy groups are being eliminated.
And besides all that, let me remind you that on the left bank of the river, an enemy group numbering 15 battalions has been blocked.
In the Kharkov region, as is known, the city of Kupyansk came under our control several weeks ago. There, our troops are controlling the city but are not advancing westward for now.
The Western troop grouping has taken the strategically important city of Kupyansk, which the enemy is unsuccessfully trying to reclaim.
Putin has nothing to boast about on the battlefield so far, so he has to continue negotiations in Abu Dhabi and make some concessions, or at least pretend to.
The agreement on territories is still under discussion. The work on security guarantees is almost complete. The prosperity agreement is nearing completion. I think that the people of Ukraine are now full of hope that we will soon reach a peace agreement.
The fact that Russia has moved on to discussing technical details is already an important sign that Putin is viewing the peace process differently, not in terms of its effectiveness, but in terms of dragging it out, because he already realized that having people like Medinsky involved in the peace process at least signals to the Americans that Putin has no serious intentions. They understand perfectly well that a clown cannot decide matters of war and peace, so then he sends serious people there, like generals, so to speak.
And if we add the news about the possible transfer of Tomahawks and the disconnection of Starlink for the Russians, we can conclude that, despite the abnormal frosts and attacks on the energy sector, Ukraine is literally crushing the Russians on all fronts.
Next, we speak with Roman Tsvetan, military expert and retired colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, hello. I'm very glad to welcome you.
I wish everyone a safe journey.
The feeling is mutual. Let's start with some good news, and whoever the author may be, it's all a plus for Ukraine. This morning in Moscow, an unknown person fired several shots at Lieutenant General of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Alexeyev. This creature is still alive, of course, but nevertheless, even if only temporarily put out of action, how much of a plus is this for Ukraine? What kind of person was this individual, this specimen? And the main question today, probably more of a political one. Who do you think actually ordered this assassination attempt?
I completely agree with the point you are making. Whoever was responsible for doing this, it is undoubtedly a significant advantage for Ukraine, at the very least, because it helps to alleviate a portion of the intense military pressure currently placed on us. One of the key, you could say, figures involved in such actions is the main intelligence directorate. This is the intelligence directorate that, in principle, started all the trouble, which then, as in our case, escalated into a prolonged terrorist war with a genocidal bent. Of course, we understand this perfectly well because these kinds of, on the one hand, blotters, I'm using their slang on purpose, end up being the reason for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of our own, and already more than a million Russians. So in other words, this is also a blow to their own people, among others. So that's why anyone could have taken action against him, our people, his compatriots, or third parties. And that's also possible because this very group was involved in certain poisonings. The same work with Novichok back in Britain. So from MI6 to Kakuridan or Nord Armada, probably everyone could have taken part in this process. But I'll say it again, I agree with your point that no matter who did it, it's still a win for Ukraine because yet another Russian individual, a Russian federalist, has been removed from trying to put pressure on us. The Russians will use this now, or at least try to, from an informational standpoint. We have heard this from the top officials of the Russian state who are trying to accuse Ukraine of certain actions, of disrupting some negotiations supposedly related, for example, to the attempt to eliminate this individual. Well, even that actually works in our favor too. Why? Because any kind of negotiation platform with an enemy who is on your territory, on your own territory, means negotiations about capitulation. In other words, as long as the enemy is on your land, the only contact with them should be through firepower. Only after you have successfully driven them out or completely defeated their forces on your own territory, can you then begin establishing formal contact groups to carefully determine the specific demands for reparations and absolutely nothing more. So from both sides, this is a plus for us, and our position should be Ukrainocentrism. Anything that is beneficial for Ukraine means it perfectly suits us as well.
Well, considering that this individual was one of the founding fathers of Wagner, could this be a delayed execution for Prigozhin's march?
From the side, unlikely. Likely, yes, that is correct. Well, the main point to consider is that it is highly unlikely that it was actually ever used as a primary launchpad for the Wagner group itself. You see, various other military forces were also heavily involved in Wagner's operations. Initially, the organization mostly started out as a private security company for international gold miners, or rather for those involved in the large-scale extraction of gold across the African continent. Well, anyone who knows the whole background and the company itself, Prigozhin was basically involved in gold in Africa. It was only later when Wagner PMC started being used to carry out combat missions on Ukrainian territory that, of course, GRU operatives got involved in some way, tying up loose ends. Although I don't rule out the possibility that this is less about revenge and more about the ongoing struggle between the so-called Kremlin towers. That is, there is a certain confrontation within Moscow itself, within the Kremlin itself, specifically between the security group, the intelligence group, internal security, as well as the political and economic groups. That's why among themselves, they might even end up shooting at each other, including literally. All the more so because to get onto a secured territory, let's say, and the perimeter was definitely guarded, only people who have access to that area can do it, or at least those who enabled the killer to enter or the attempted killer in the case of an attempted assassination. So most likely these processes are internal, generated within Russia, within, meaning the agenda is Moscow's, the Kremlin's. Nevertheless, it ended up working in our favor. So in principle, you could say that this can be seen as essentially a positive development for Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
And in addition, we should also take into account the fear and panic it has sown among all these Russian pseudo-elites, because now they'll be trembling, wondering if they're on some kind of execution list, deferred ones, so to speak, when another death needs to be pinned on the Ukrainian side. Well, that's also, again, a plus for us, these kinds of long-term consequences. So let's talk a bit about Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory, about the deep strikes. So in Belgorod, after the missile attack, electricity, water and heating disappeared. It's clear that humanitarian problems and humanitarian catastrophe are not the original goal of the Russian Federation. All of that is just collateral, right? So I have a few questions for you. Why is it mainly the Belgorod region that's under attack right now, first of all? Is it because we can't reach further? Or have we not yet completed all our objectives specifically in this region? And what have we already achieved with strikes on this particular area?
Well, the thing is, in order to stop the Russians' local offensive operations, let's say in the Belgorod-Kharkiv direction, it's a local one. The Russians are trying to advance on the Kharkiv region through Belgorod, through the Belgorod region, and in the area of Kharkiv, in the area of Lipshivo-Lysychansk, and in the area of Kupyansk. That's also the Kharkiv region. Moreover, the railways that lead to Valuiki also pass through the Belgorod region. And naturally, it's very important for us to stop this traffic, this railway traffic. And since most of the traffic is powered by electric traction, it's important for us to cut off the power generation that supplies the railway, the traction substations on the railway, certain substations that are used to transfer electricity and so on and so forth. Moreover, it's especially important to shut down the balancing capacities, that is the thermal power plants that are specifically supplying electricity for the transport of military equipment. So here, it's purely a military objective. Why is it specifically the army's rear that is being targeted for destruction? In other words, it's crucial to stop the transfer of forces and resources through the army's rear. That's a depth of about 50 plus or minus 70 kilometers. In the past few weeks, there has been quite a serious focus on targeting the army's rear areas in order to prevent Russian strategic reserves from reaching the front line. And this is happening practically from Kherson to Kharkiv if we look from our side. And from the Russian side, on the occupied territories, it's from Crimea all the way to Russia's Belgorod. That's basically why we're talking about Belgorod right now. The strikes will definitely continue, of course, and the cutoff of heat and electricity to the civilian population there. That's secondary, that's already a consequence of carrying out the main military objective. That's definitely not the main objective, because the Russians, their system has been complicated like this since Soviet times, have military facilities located on civilian sites, or vice versa, civilian facilities are attached to military ones, especially at military sites like power generation, there are civilian facilities as well. So naturally, the civilian population in the border regions will inevitably suffer. The thing is, right now, they're focusing on the Belgorod region because there are serious attacks happening on our borders there. Although, without a doubt, similar level strikes are coming next for the Kursk region, the Bryansk region, the Voronezh region, and the Rostov region. The 5 regions I mentioned border Ukraine. For us, they serve as the army's, Russia's rear, the enemy's rear. In fact, it's not just a military rear. This logistics needs to be worked out up to the second echelon, up to 150 or 200 kilometers deep, which means practically all 5 of these regions in their entirety.
Let them get ready. Roman Grigorievich, to what extent will the 2 new ballistic missiles, which have already been developed by Ukraine, help us achieve these goals in these regions? It's not us boasting and making announcements. This is being reported by a very reputable publication, after all, Deutsche Welle. I mean, the FP9 missile with a range of 850 kilometers and a warhead weight of about 800 kilograms. And the other missile has a shorter range, yes, about 300 kilometers, the FP7.
Well, Deutsche Welle is reporting this, but based on statements from our own missile manufacturers, Firepoint, as I call them, fiery show-offs, who are also trying to get the Flamingo missile off the ground, which, by the way, is still just a promise that was supposed to be fulfilled by the end of last year. So these very announcements, the promises they couldn't keep, it would have been better if they hadn't made them at all. And then it would have been much easier. It wouldn't have triggered such a negative backlash. By now, there's already an aversion, at the very least, to all these Firepoint productions. But as for the missile itself, being ballistic, it's highly anticipated. The thing is, without ballistics, we won't be able to break through Russian air defenses. And for us, it's really important, even for those same army rear positions we talked about. For that, you need ballistics to reach a depth of about 200 kilometers to hit the second echelon. And these 300-kilometer ballistic missiles, in principle, can do that because they'll be launched from about 100 kilometers behind the front line. That's why, to work through the near rear, it's important not to give Russian troops the opportunity to push through army rear positions. And of course, it's important to be able to reach Moscow and, if possible, St. Petersburg as well. Maybe not the city itself, because it's crucial to take out Ust-Luga and the ports. These are the ports through which the main transshipment of Russian oil and gas takes place. It's also important for us to cripple the Russian economy, to bring about the collapse of the Russian Empire. Otherwise, well, we're at war with the world, at least as long as the Russian Empire exists. And you can take it out precisely by destroying the ports through which oil and gas are transshipped. That is the oil and gas sector of the Russians. That's Primorsk, north of St. Petersburg, and Ust-Luga, south of St. Petersburg. We definitely need to reach Novorossiysk, Tuapse, Taman as well, and Temryuk. These are ports on the warm seas where Russia has access. There are also outlets there, including pipelines specifically for the oil and gas sector. Even in Taman, there's even an outlet for the ammonia pipeline. So it needs to be targeted. The optimal option would be to create something serious and completely stop the transfer of Russian hydrocarbons. For that, you need warheads of more than 500 kilograms or maybe even more. Just like on the FPV-9, which is claimed to have an 800-kilogram warhead. Plus, this type of warhead can be tandem for destroying Russia's deep, so to speak, arsenals, because we still can't reach them. A tandem warhead weighing more than half a ton can, in principle, penetrate 3 or 4 floors. So, if the FPV did exist, it would be very important for us right now. That's exactly the issue here. There were announcements last year, unfulfilled ones, and now even Deutsche Welle has gotten involved. But again, let me repeat, according to the words of the same heads of this private company, for now, it's still just in the announcement stage. Of course, it would be great to get this missile, especially since, in principle, it's possible to produce it at our facilities. Back in the day, we used to, well, in the last millennium, we built intercontinental ballistic missiles, the SS-18. This is our Ukrainian missile, a Satan, which practically drove all NATO troops mad with fear, fully realizing that its range of 10 to 15,000 kilometers, with the ability to deliver a 9-ton warhead and a circular error probable of 450 meters, left virtually no chance for anything to survive such a strike. In other words, fully understanding that we are capable of making ballistic missiles, especially those of short and medium range. This is basically a piece of cake for us. It's still unclear why we don't have them yet. They should have already, well, let's wait and see. Since foreign publications are already starting to hint at the announcement of such actions, I think maybe indeed in the near future we will see at least pre-production batches of this type of missile. Let me repeat once again, this is not a complicated missile, not complicated to manufacture. Of course, the engine is important. Well, that is, a rocket engine means the fuel should be solid propellant, most likely. It's a specific nozzle which we have. The thing is, we used to produce the same Grom-2. This is the export version of the Sapsan project, our own project. Again, the same short-range missile with a range of 500 kilometers, which could have reached Moscow if it hadn't been shut down by this government, shut down at the very beginning of their term. And basically, we would already have the Sapsan, and we wouldn't have to wait for the FP7 and FP9.
And is it impossible to bring back the Sapsan development? Well, to restore production? Well,
of course, why not? It can be brought back. To do that, you just need to set the task and provide funding. That is a technical assignment. The optimal option is to bring Sapsan back. We have it. We have the launchers. By the way, the Sapsan project missiles, they were still in use in 2022. There were a few missiles left. They hit Saki, and at that time, 3 ballistic missiles destroyed a squadron of Russian naval aviation aircraft in Saki. In 2022, this was exactly what worked. And then our general staff confirmed literally a year later that it was our ballistic missiles at work. At that time, the only ballistic missiles we had with such a range were from the Sapsan project. So it is definitely possible to accomplish this task. But for that, the task should be assigned not to private companies, but to state enterprises, which were the ones that used to produce Sapsan Grom-2 and sold them to the same Saudis. Again, if state enterprises were involved in missile production, say the same Flamingo missiles, and if Antonov were given the task, for example, that is, they got the An-196 Lyuty airborne in just a few months. Now it's called Lyuty, and it really is fierce, striking Russian targets. In other words, it's a drone that has proven itself well. Naturally, the enterprise that made the MRIO would have been able to produce the Flamingo in 6 months to a year. And by now, this flamingo, with its range of 3,000 kilometers, would have already burned down all of Russia's oil industry, from the Yama Cross all the way to the Omsk oil refinery. In other words, the wrong priorities were set. Funding went to private firms, especially those without a proper production background, particularly in missile manufacturing. But all of this can be brought back, and in principle, at this stage, it's even possible to launch the production of both types of weapons in parallel. Cruise missiles with the AI-25TL engine, an excellent engine made in Zaporizhzhia. Thousands of them have been produced. At one time, they were installed on the Yak-42, and later they were produced and released in large quantities and installed on Czech L-39 aircraft. I personally logged 1,500 flight hours on this engine, and now this engine has been used in the Flamingo missile as well. Again, the same task could have been assigned to Antonov. And this same AI-25TLD engine has now been adopted by the Turks for their MIUS project. Their Kizilelma drones are already flying in pairs and are already destroying aerial targets at ranges of up to 100 kilometers. So the engine is very good. In principle, it could have been used for missiles as well.
Well, let's hope that they are listening to you and to other experts as well, and that everything will be done so that all these goals are achieved as early as 2026. And we see the ports of Ust-Luga in flames, truly dark nights in St. Petersburg, really dark, and dark windows in Moscow. Roman Grigorievich, thank you so much for finding the time and sharing your analysis with us. Roman Tsivtan, retired colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, was our guest today. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this episode. Roman Grigorievich, until next time.
Goodbye.